Today we're going to be taking a look at the structured ECG rule of fours approach. In the previous video we had a look at the four initial features, and in this section we're going to be taking a look at the four waves. Just as a quick recap, we know that the ECG waveform is composed of different segments, and each segment represents a different phase of the cardiac cycle. We have our P wave at the start, which represents atrial depolarization. We have the QRS complex in the middle, which represents ventricular depolarization, and we have the T wave at the end, which is responsible for ventricular repolarization. If we take a look at each of these waves individually, starting with the P wave first, we can basically ask a couple of questions for each wave to determine whether it's normal or abnormal. In the case of P waves, the two main questions we want to ask are about the morphology or the shape, and whether there's QRS concordance. To understand these questions further, let's start by taking a look at morphology first. The normal shape of a P wave should be this rounded structure before the QRS complex, and it's usually less than 3 small squares in duration and less than 0.25 millimeters in amplitude. Types of abnormal P waves can include peaked P waves, where the amplitude goes above 0.25 millimeters. This is referred to as P pulmonale, and it's often caused by right atrial enlargement. Remember that the P wave is formed from atrial depolarization, so if the right atrium is enlarged, we can imagine that the amplitude will be higher. A second type of shape abnormality could be bifid P waves, and this is where we have 2 peaks in the P waves rather than just one. This is sometimes referred to as P mitrale, and this occurs in left atrial enlargement. The reason why we see this one is because with left atrial enlargement, it takes longer for the atria to depolarize, which results in a duration greater than 3 small squares. Just to take a look at a few tracing examples, here we can see the presence of normal P waves, peaked P waves or P pulmonale, and bifid P waves or P mitrale. One other abnormality to be aware of is the absence of P waves, which is often due to atrial fibrillation, and we'll talk about this in more detail later. After assessing the morphology, the second thing we want to ask is about QRS concordance, and the main question we're asking here is if there's a P wave before every QRS complex. If we take a look at the tracing on the left first, we can see that there are clear P waves before each QRS complex, and this is referred to as sinus rhythm because the impulse is being generated in the sinoatrial node. Comparing this to the tracing on the right, we can no longer see clear P waves, and this rhythm would therefore be deemed not to be sinus. This means that the impulse is probably being generated somewhere aside from the sinoatrial node. Whenever reading an ECG, it's always important to state whether the rhythm is sinus or not, as it can help to differentiate between different pathologies. Keeping these factors in mind, let's take a look at a couple of 12-lead ECG examples with P wave abnormalities. If you want to, you can pause the video and try to work out the abnormality in each case. Working through this case, the main lead that we're going to be focusing on is the rhythm strip, or lead 2, and we can zoom in to take a closer look at this. If we focus on the P waves, it's actually quite hard to make out a P wave before every QRS complex, and instead we have multiple bumps between each QRS complex, which aren't that clear cut. These are referred to as fibrillatory waves. Another clue from this tracing is if we check the rhythm, and in this instance you can see that the distances between the QRS complexes are constantly changing, and the rhythm is therefore irregularly irregular. Putting both of these features together, this ECG strip most likely represents atrial fibrillation because of the presence of fibrillatory waves and an irregularly irregular rhythm. Let's now move on to a second example with this 12-lead ECG here. Once again, the main lead that we're interested in is lead 2, or the rhythm strip. In this case, we can see that there are multiple P waves before each QRS complex, and this can sometimes be described as a sawtooth pattern. At the same time, if we check the rhythm of this strip, we can see that the QRS complexes are occurring at regular intervals, so the rhythm itself is regular. Whenever we see both of these changes in conjunction with each other, this is representative of atrial flutter, and we can check to see if this pattern is followed in the rest of the leads as well. Okay, so we've had a look at P waves now, and the next part of the waveform we're going to look at is the QRS complex, which represents ventricular depolarization. Just like with the P waves, there are two questions we can ask about the QRS complex, which include the amplitude and the duration. Importantly, when we assess the QRS complex, we want to take a look at the complex in leads V1 to V6, or the anterior chest leads, as these often provide the best view. If we take a look at the question about amplitude first, a normal QRS amplitude is usually between 5 to 25 millimeters in the precordial chest leads. Any complex within this range is deemed to be normal. However, we can have complexes with a high amplitude as well, and this can be seen in pathologies such as left ventricular hypertrophy. This can be visualized on the ECG as either a deep S wave in the V1 lead or a tall R wave in V6. We do have specific cutoff values for how many squares are required to be identified as hypertrophy, but we'll look at that in a separate topic. After looking at the amplitude, we can take a look at the duration as well. We should normally have a narrow QRS complex with a duration less than 120 milliseconds, or less than 3 small squares. In some instances, we may get a broad QRS complex, where the value of this duration goes above 120 milliseconds. Sometimes broad QRS complexes can look quite strange on the ECG, but the main thing you're looking at is the duration itself. Just to take a look at a couple of examples, in this case, if we look at any of the anterior chest leads or in lead 2, we can see that the QRS complexes appear quite broad and are definitely more than 3 small squares. Whenever we have a widened QRS, it's always important to calculate the rate and the rhythm alongside this. In this case, we can estimate the rate to be around 300 divided by 1.5 squares, which gives us a tachycardic rate of 200 beats per minute. We can also see that the pattern follows a regular rhythm. Combining these features together, we can say that this is a broad complex tachycardia. If we switch to the second case, in this instance you can see that the QRS complexes appear to be quite narrow and are less than 120 milliseconds. Once again, after establishing the complex, we can calculate the rate, and here we can calculate it to be around 200 beats per minute once more. The difference in this occasion is that we would classify this ECG as a narrow complex tachycardia, and more specifically, this is deemed to be a supraventricular tachycardia, or SVT. Another piece of information we can obtain from the QRS complex is concerning bundle branch blocks, and this is where there's complete or partial interruption in the flow of impulses in either of the main bundle branches of the heart. We can divide these into left bundle branch blocks and right bundle branch blocks, depending on which side is affected. Now importantly, the precordial chest leads can help to identify bundle branch blocks on an ECG, and more specifically, these are leads V1 and V6. In a left bundle branch block, you can see that we have this W shape in V1 and an M shape in V6. Alternatively, in a right bundle branch block, we end up with an M-shaped QRS complex in V1 and a W shape in V6. Notice that in both types of bundle branch blocks, the QRS complex duration is increased because it's taking longer for the electrical impulses to flow. One method of remembering the types of bundle branch block shapes is the phrase William-Marrow. So if we look at the word William first, we can see that we have a W in V1, an M in V6, and the 2 L's in the middle represent the left-hand side. We can apply the same logic to the word marrow as well. So we have an M in V1, a W in V6, and the 2 R's in the middle represent that this is a right bundle branch block. Just to take a look at one example of a bundle branch block on a 12-lead ECG, we have this tracing here. Once again, the main leads that we're interested in are V1 and V6. And here we can see that we have an M shape in V1. It's a bit more difficult to work out the shape in V6, but there is a slight W pattern to it. And it goes to show that in real-life ECGs, it's sometimes a bit more difficult to spot the patterns compared to when we're learning in theory. Remembering the word marrow here, you can see that we have a right bundle branch block in this case. After looking at the QRS complex, we can take a look at the T wave in more detail. The two main questions we want to ask on this occasion are surrounding the morphology or the shape and the amplitude of the T wave. Starting with the morphology first, T waves often have this rounded appearance, and they should be upright in all leads except V1 and AVR. Different types of T wave morphologies can exist, and we can have inverted T waves where the T waves aren't upright in the correct leads, and this can be caused by factors such as ischemia, bundle branch blocks, hypertrophy, or cardiomyopathies. Another type of pathology we might see are biphasic T waves, where we have an upward portion followed by a downward portion. And this could be caused by pathologies such as ischemia, Wellen syndrome, and hypokalemia. Whenever you see an abnormality in the shape of the T wave, it's always a good idea to mention which leads are affected, as this can help to localize the abnormality. After assessing the shape, we can move on to assessing the amplitude. And in normal T waves, the amplitude should be less than 5 millimeters in the limb leads and less than 10 millimeters in leads V1 to V6. In some occasions, we can get what's known as peaked T waves, where the amplitude is much higher than normal. This can be caused by various pathologies, but the main one to know about is hyperkalemia or high potassium. In the opposite way, we may have some situations where the T waves appear to be more flattened compared to normal, and this can reflect electrolyte abnormalities such as hypokalemia. Let's take a look at one practice question which has quite a few different wave abnormalities. If you want to, you can pause the video and try to find the abnormalities and work out the most likely diagnosis in this case. Working through this scenario, the main lead that we want to focus on is lead 2, or the rhythm strip. If we start with the P waves first, it's actually quite difficult to make out any discernible P waves before the complexes, so we do have a loss of these present on this tracing. In terms of the QRS complexes themselves, these appear to be quite wide and are definitely greater than 120 milliseconds. Finally, in terms of the T waves, we can see that these appear to be quite peaked and elevated with a high amplitude. Combining all of these features together suggests a diagnosis of hyperkalemia, and this is what it can look like on a 12-lead ECG. Okay, so we've now had a look at the main waves associated with the ECG waveform, but there is one type of wave which can sometimes be seen, known as the U wave, and this represents the repolarization of Purkinje fibers. U waves should usually be absent on a normal ECG, but it's always important to check for the presence of them, as they can indicate pathologies such as hypokalemia, hypothermia, or bradycardia. Just to show one example of how this can appear on a 12-lead ECG, we have this tracing here, where we can see the presence of the U waves, as denoted by a small bump following the T wave. Just to review everything, we've now had a look at how to assess the 4 initial features and the 4 waves on a 12-lead ECG. In the next part, we'll have a look at how to interpret the 4 intervals. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.